Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, only one more week without Roxanne, right, Pat George?
She will return later this week and then triumphantly next Monday for you.
Well, we're excited about that. We can't wait for that. And till she gets back, though, I tell you and I have been doing a pretty good job of holding down the fort here.
You've been doing a great job.
Well,
and I've been watching you for the last 45 minutes getting ready for today's show. You've got papers in there. You can't even see the top of that desk.
I got so many papers in here. I couldn't even talk to you this morning. I had so many papers to
You're
go
highlighting things, and you really do your homework.
Well, I try to.
As an attorney and as a talk show host.
That's exactly right. You know, I try to bring the information. I want to have the correct information to share with folks. And, you know, part of that leads us to sort of leading the news in a way on this show. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed over the past couple of weeks, but, I mean, we were a little bit ahead of the...
Past couple of weeks.
Well...
For several years.
Past several years, we've been a little bit ahead of the news. And, you know, it's interesting to me how the stuff comes out the week after we talked about it on Monday.
I think the same thing.
I mean, it's like every time we talk about something, it all of a sudden becomes big news. Now, it doesn't mean nobody else ever reported on it before us because, you know, I'm not doing any independent reporting. I'm just reading very broadly and trying to stay on top of everything that's going on. So, you know, we did that with the coronavirus story, and then Tom Cotton came out and said basically the exact same thing that we had said on the show. So I'm counting Tom Cotton, Senator Cotton, as one of our core listeners. And, you know, that happened again this week because if you remember the Out There segment last week, we talked about the media mind control, which we've talked about before. We talk about that a good bit on this show. But then here comes, you know, the talk shows this past weekend and some of the late night shows last week. And all of a sudden I hear Devin Nunes is kind of out front with that. Now, we got to give credit where credit belongs in this case, and that is with President Trump, who first called the media, right, the enemy of the people. And, you know, it's interesting when you think about President Trump because sometimes he says these things that certainly the media tells you to think are outlandish, but then later they turn out to have been true. And I think it's amazing. It reminds me of being at the Federalist Society Florida Lawyers Convention a couple of weeks ago and hearing a special interview with Don McGahn. Remember White House counsel Don McGahn?
Right.
And I tell you what, he had some really interesting things to say about the president, most of them positive. In fact, he didn't say anything negative to my ears about the president, which would go against the media narrative that, oh, once he gets a chance to testify, he's really going to open up on all the bad things the president did. Well, actually, if you listen to Don McGahn, it sounded like he was a pretty big fan of the president. And what he said that really stuck with me is the president is one of the fastest thinkers that he has ever met, that he runs through decision trees faster than anybody Don McGahn's ever dealt with or ever represented, and that he's extremely decisive, and that he sometimes gets to these conclusions that you think, again, right off the bat, you think that can't be or that's not how it's going to happen. Well, over and over and over again, he turns out to have been correct. So Don McGahn was singing the president's praises about his decisive and fast thinking and his ability to kind of run down the decision trees and think, well, if I do this and they do that and I do this and they do that, what's going to be the end result?
Yeah, a lot of people believe that he goes ready, shoot, aim.
Well, apparently he's ready. He doesn't need to aim.
Right.
He's already there. He just thinks a lot faster than many people, and people aren't comfortable with that. And they say, well, he's making decisions without thinking. No, he's just thinking a lot faster than you are. And don't be upset about that. Admire the man's mental acuity, right? That's what you ought to be doing in that situation. Well, he called the media the enemy of the people. And now here we are, we're finding out after 3 years of the Russia hoax and then the Ukraine hoax, we're finding out that, yeah, the media is the enemy of the people. And Devin Nunes, congressman from California, who we really like on this show, who's actually led a lot of these stories. I mean, Devin Nunes was one of the first ones to figure all this out 3 years ago. He was on Laura Ingram's show last week and talked about the media assassins. And basically, he thinks that the Republicans and Trump supporters ought not even talk to the media. Listen to what he had to say.
The most important thing that the president has done, of all the things that he's done are very important, but he's finally outed the media. The media in this town has been corrupt, and it took somebody like Trump to finally bring them out of their shell to where now they'll just openly go out. They'll tweet about it late at night. They get drunk. They send drunk tweets out, and they're vicious to him and Republicans. And I continue to try to get our Republicans to wake up in the Capitol. We should not be talking to the mainstream media. They are assassins. They're working for the other team. You have to fight, and part of that fight includes not saying stupid things and cooperating with the media who are really working for the Democrats. It's such a key, because we're already at a disadvantage with the tech companies.
Think about that. And, of course, he goes on to say stuff about the tech companies and how involved they are. And we'll get to some of that when we talk about Iowa. We won't be able to cover all of it in all the detail that we'd like to, but we'll put you onto some names and some additional things that you can be researching on your own to find out what really happened in the Iowa caucuses. But let's stick with the media for just a minute, right? Let's look at the lineup, because you talk about slanted. I mean, last week was probably one of the best weeks in the history of the Trump presidency. Last week was a great week for President Trump on many different levels, and we're going to get to some of those throughout the show. We're going to talk about the State of the Union. We're going to talk about some of the court cases that he beat, and we're going to talk about some of the other stuff that happened last week that's positive for President Trump's administration. But after that week, let's just look at the lineup of the Sunday shows that happened yesterday. And, the Sunday shows are where a lot of people get their summary of what happened this week. So let's look at the lineup on ABC. ABC's Sunday morning show this week, Democrat presidential candidates Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Pete Buttigieg. On NBC's Meet the Press, they had Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders. Okay? On Face the Nation on CBS, they had Buttigieg, Sanders, and Lindsey Graham, as well as China's ambassador to the U.S. And we're going to talk some about what he had to say later in the program. When we get to our Out There segment, we start really looking, peeling back the layers of the onion on the coronavirus. But how about CNN's State of the Union show? They had Buttigieg, Sanders, and DNC chairman Tom Perez. And then how about Fox News Sunday? It was Buttigieg. So, basically all they had on was Buttigieg and a couple of other also candidates, because, of course, the media narrative wants you to now settle on Buttigieg, and they don't want it to be Sanders, and we'll tell you some about that. But they had nobody from the White House. And one of the best weeks of his presidency, they had nobody from the White House. Now, another issue that's coming up soon, and Devin Nunes had some stuff to say about this on Maria Bartiromo, who is one of the solid reporters out there on her show, Sunday Morning Futures. He had some stuff to say about accountability. And it's a question in a lot of our minds. Is there going to be any accountability for the Russia hoax that occurred? And listen to what Congressman Nunes has to say, because I think it's pretty encouraging.
I believe we're going to get accountability. I believe Durham's going to get to the full story. You see what the president is doing. I've been saying for a long time that the National Security Council that's there at the White House, 400 and some people, he would be best to take all of those people, ship them across the Potomac, quarantine them, get them the hell away from the White House, because we know that a lot of the leaks for the last 3+ years have been coming from that National Security Council. So the president really needs to only have Trump appointees that are close to him in the White House, because we know they're talking to the media. And look, that's really what's caused this problem. It's been the media. The legacy media in this country, they're not doing their jobs. This whole Russia hoax and Ukraine hoax, they were in on it from the very beginning. They've refused to talk about just how wrong the Democrats really were. You have to ask yourself, why is that? At some point, you have to understand, they're just part of the team. They're part of the socialist left. There's no other excuse for it.
No other excuse for it. The Democrats and the media have an alliance. The media is on the side of the socialist left, on the side of the Democrats, and that's what we've seen. Now, speaking of accountability and whether or not we're going to see any, the Gateway Pundit over the weekend is reporting that the word on the street from qualified sources is that former deep state crooked cops are going to be arrested this week. Now, we're not going to hold our breath here on this show, because we've had so many disappointments and so many promises that haven't been fulfilled. But, Lindsey Graham, and he's one you can't completely trust, by the way, as we pointed out many, many times. But Lindsey Graham went on the Judge Jeanine show over the weekend and said half the people behind the Russia investigation are going to go to jail. Now, wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be amazing if people like Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe and maybe even John Brennan, the CIA director?
Never going to happen.
You think it's never going to happen. I kind of lean towards the fact that it's probably never going to happen. But goodness, Isn't it a fun thought to have?
That's a nice thought.
Isn't it a nice thought to have that there's going to be some actual accountability here?
Well, a little bit of balance.
I got to say, I'm encouraged by what Congressman Nunes, had to say about it, because he said he thinks there's going to be accountability. And, if you look at his track record over the last 3 years, everything that he's said has been right. Now, the media won't tell you that. In fact, they'll tell you it's all these conspiracy theories and that he's been wrong. But if you actually look at the evidence and don't just listen to what the supposed authorities tell you to think about it, but if you actually look at the evidence, Congressman Nunes has been right every step of the way, and he was right from the beginning. So when it comes to people that we're going to listen to, Congressman Devin Nunes is one of those people. We'll be right back. We've got a lot more to tell you about on the Morgan Streetman Show. Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. And if you want to get on the horn with us, the number to call is 888-404-1010. Also, you can find our archives at morganstreetmedia.com and on YouTube at Morgan Street Media if you want to go back and listen to some of our past shows. Well, we have a lot to cover this week, so I'm going to just jump right back into it. Wanted to talk about a local interest story that I think is worthy of note. That's something that happened in Jacksonville on Saturday afternoon around 4 p.m. in the Sandalwood area of Jacksonville at a Walmart. There was actually a tent out registering voters, a pro-Trump tent registering voters. Now, there were 5 women working this tent, this pro-Trump registration tent. And what happens but a young man, 27-year-old Gregory Tim, pulls up in a rusty old brown Chevy van, and he apparently was waving at them and sort of acting kind of friendly, and then he accelerated the van into the tent. He basically tried to run them over with his van. Now, we're talking about 5 women, and this is a 27-year-old young man tries to run them over after he runs over all the tables and knocks everything over in the tent where he tried to ram them. And by the way, one of the ladies said she just barely got out of the way. So, he could have killed somebody very easily in this little stunt that he pulled. He gets out of his van, and he starts taking video of it, and he takes a moment to flip him off. Well, needless to say, he's been arrested, and Jacksonville Sheriff's Office has arrested him, thankfully.
Was he sober?
You have to wonder, don't you, Pat George? But, when you look at it, let's look at what some of the leadership of the Democrat Party has told people. How about Nancy Pelosi, where she said, I don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, right? So she's encouraging uprisings. How about Hillary Clinton, where she said you cannot be civil with Republicans and Trump supporters. You cannot be civil. In fact, take your car and run them over, right? There's no room for civil discourse. There's no room for accepting that other people may not agree with your political opinions. Run them over. How about Mad Maxine Waters? Remember what she said? She said, push back. Tell them they're not welcome. Remember that? Push back. Wherever you see them in public, push back. Well, that's exactly what this young man in Jacksonville did. He took it to heart, just like Antifa's taken it to heart, and they've been active in Portland over the weekend. But just like these groups, these liberal groups, these socialist left groups, they all decided at some point along the way that violence is acceptable in political discourse. Now, you're not going to convert anybody through violence. In fact, you're going to turn a large part of America off. And there's something I always say a lot, and that's that you can't antagonize and persuade at the same time. So if you think violence should be a part of your political discourse, in my opinion, you've already lost the argument, and you're admitting it, and you're now switching over to violence.
Well, George Lopez, who is very anti-Trump. I don't know if you've heard any of his rhetoric.
Yeah.
Okay. Yesterday on a show, he had said, they asked him the question, do you think Trump is going to be president? And he said, absolutely.
Well, I think he is. I think he
will
is.
He be elected again? He said, absolutely. That's why I'm voting 9 times. but he has changed his tune.
We laugh, but that's sad because a lot of these people do vote more than once. I don't know that George Lopez will do it, but people like him will try to vote more than once. And of course, in a lot of counties, there are more registered voters than there are voters who are alive, which is something that makes you scratch your head. How did that happen? Who's voting those ballots, right? Well, and look at what happened in Iowa. I don't think this was some accident or some mistake of technology, because it doesn't appear that it was. The reason that what happened in Iowa occurred is that Bernie Sanders won Iowa. So that's why they didn't want to report on it, because the DNC, the Democrat National Committee, the club of people who decide the elections, remember, just like they said, just like they took the election away from Bernie Sanders last time and gave it to Hillary, because they said they can. And this is all in court cases. I'm not just making this stuff up. These are the positions that they took in actual court cases, that they can decide these things in a smoky back room, and they did so. Well, it's the same kind of thing they did in Iowa, where if you look at Pete Buttigieg's support, I mean, it rockets upward right in time for the Iowa caucus. And, I'm having a hard time believing it. Why? Because they needed somebody. They've been searching around for anybody. They needed somebody to try to take out Bernie Sanders. Well, if you look at even the reported votes, and we finally do have the delegate count assigned, but if you look at even the reported votes, and I just find this funny, for a group that hates the Electoral College so much and thinks we ought to go by the popular vote, we got to go by the popular vote all the time. Well, guess what? Bernie won the popular vote in Iowa by over 2,500 votes. He won. But who gets the most delegates? Buttigieg. Buttigieg gets 14 delegates. Bernie Sanders only gets 12. Elizabeth Warren, Hiawatha, she gets 8. Biden gets 6. And we'll tell you more about Biden in just a minute because, he barely deserves the 6 he got, believe me. Amy Klobuchar, she got 1. Meanwhile, we're expected to believe that there was some sort of error in the app that counted all these votes. Well, Sidney Blumenthal's kid, Max Blumenthal, reports, and believe me, he is no conservative. He is a raging liberal. But he reports that there's something very strange going on with the group that designed and distributed this app that counted the votes in Iowa. The actual company that did it is called Shadow Inc., but the money behind Shadow Inc. comes from a dark money nonprofit called Acronym that was seeded by the Silicon Valley billionaire Reid Hoffman. Now, he's the founder of LinkedIn and a political activist. But that app was a political hit job on Bernie Sanders. And that's what we got to see. It supposedly malfunctions, miscounts everything. But they're talking about recanvassing Iowa. And apparently Bernie Sanders is going to call for that by today at 1 p.m., that they do a recanvass in Iowa. Why? Because he won. And they're not giving him the win. They don't want him to win. Meanwhile, the guy that they are giving the win really doesn't have a chance, in my opinion, of winning. Listen to this guy. Here he is in New Hampshire on Friday night. The guy's made an entire career out of filling the air with words, but saying absolutely nothing. Listen to what Pete Buttigieg says and try to figure this out if you can.
I'm not interested in the labels. I'm not interested in what Republicans are going to say. I'm interested in the style of politics that we need to put forward to actually, finally, turn the page. In order to win, yes, but also in order to govern. This is a moment where the next president is going to face challenges, the likes of which we hadn't even thought of a few years or decades ago. And politically,
we're
facing
about?
A fundamentally new problem with President Donald Trump. So the biggest risk we could take at a time like this would be to go up against that fundamentally new challenge by trying to fall back on the familiar or trying to unite this country at a moment when we need that kind of unification, when our nominee is dividing people with a politics that says if you don't go all the way to the edge, it doesn't count.
It doesn't count.
Politics that says it's my way or the highway.
What is that guy even talking about? He's just up there like, oh, boy, let me just think of something else that I could say that won't get me in any trouble, right? That's all he's doing. And speaking of getting in trouble, we got a clip to play from you from Joe Biden. This guy just makes you scratch your head. He's done for, but we called that weeks ago that he's done for. Just let me stay on this Buttigieg and Sanders thing for a minute, because I'll tell you what, the media, you can't trust them at all. But I'll tell you, when they decide it's got to be Buttigieg, they will come out in force against Sanders. And Chris Matthews, who I don't care for at all, really did that. And he even implied that Bernie Sanders would have been cheering as he was shot in Central Park if the communists had won the Cold War. Listen to this.
I have my own views of the word socialist, and I'll be glad to share them with you in private. And they go back to the early 1950s. I have an attitude about them. I remember the Cold War. I have an attitude towards Castro. I believe if Castro and the Reds had won the Cold War, there would have been executions in Central Park, and I might have been one of the ones getting executed. And certain other people would be there cheering, okay? So I have a problem with people who took the other side. I don't know who Bernie supports over these years. I don't know what he means by social. One week it's Denmark. We're going to be like Denmark. Okay, that's harmless. That's basically a capitalist country with a lot of good social welfare programs. Denmark is harmless. Well, what does he think of Castro? That's a great question. What did you think of Fidel Ismo? We all thought he was great when he first. I thought he was cheering like mad for him when he first went in, and then he became a communist and started shooting every one of his enemies.
Think about that. Be careful who you cheer for. Be careful who you support. Because once some of these communists get into power, like Chris Matthews said, they start shooting their enemies.
Do you think the gloves are off now in the Democratic race?
Well, I mean, have the gloves ever been on?
I think in the beginning.
I think their pants are off is what's off. These people are insane. And we got more on that. I think we're almost out of time in this segment. But I wanted to share with you something that Biden said, which you talk about insanity. Poor Biden has just really fallen off the wagon here. And there's the music, so we're not going to have time. It's about a 30-second clip. We're not going to have time to get to it in this segment.
You can play it if you want. I'll turn it down.
We'll come back to it at the beginning of the next segment. Because I tell you, the time just keeps moving along.
Yeah, Biden has changed, though, hasn't he?
Oh, boy.
In the beginning, he was up there, and now he is.
I don't think he was up there in the beginning. I mean, I think he's lost it the entire time. But you compare the Joe Biden of today to the Joe Biden of 20 or 30 years ago, and yeah, you're looking at basically two different people. It's not the same guy. I mean, it is the same guy, obviously, but his mind is not there. And the way that he responds to people, all the poking people in the chest, all the trying to physically intimidate people, yelling at them, calling that one guy fat. You thought that was bad. Wait till we come back. We're going to share another insult that he laid out on a poor lady in New Hampshire. Well, Pat George and I were talking during the break about Rush Limbaugh. And what's going on with him? Of course, he's got stage 4 lung cancer. And it brought to mind something. Rush Limbaugh's really been the trailblazer for a lot of us who are on conservative talk radio. And I've been a fan of his since I was a little kid. In fact, when I was 15 years old, I actually made a pilgrimage to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, to see his boyhood home. So, I've certainly been thinking a lot about Rush lately. And, our thoughts and our prayers are with Rush and his family, Catherine. And, we just hope he pulls through all this all right. I know he's going to be going through a lot of different medical procedures as part of this.
He'll be off the air a lot. And I wonder what's going to happen with the Golden Mike.
Well, let's just hope he makes it through all this and he comes through all right and he does another 20 years of his show.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. Well, and we told you we're going to get into, this was one of the best weeks last week for President Trump and his entire administration. But before we did that, I wanted to circle back on Joe Biden because you talk about a guy who's never going to be president at this point. Joe Biden's made a mini career as he's been running for president this time. And, of course, he's run a couple of times before. But this time that he's been running, he's really made a habit and what I'll call a mini career out of insulting his voters. And we think back to what I said earlier in the show, and you can't antagonize and persuade at the same time. And listen to what he says to a woman in New Hampshire. Listen to what he calls her. I mean, talk about women's rights and respect for women. Listen to what Joe Biden says to a voter when she asks him a perfectly reasonable question about how he expects to win after his incredibly poor showing in Iowa. Listen to this.
So how do you explain the performance in Iowa, and why should the voters believe that you can win the national election?
It's a good question. Number one, Iowa's a Democratic caucus. You ever been to a caucus? No, you haven't. You're a lying, dog-faced pony soldier. You said you were, but now you got to be honest.
What?
I'm going to be honest with you.
You're a lying, dog-faced pony soldier?
It was confusing in Iowa.
Where do you even come up with that? I mean, what does that even mean? I'm not even sure. But first, he tells her it's a good question. It's a good question. But have you ever been to a caucus? No, you're a lying, dog-faced pony soldier. What? I mean, has he been smoking some of Elizabeth Warren's wampum? What is going on with him? Yeah, so stick a fork in him. We told you that weeks ago. Stick a fork in Joe Biden. He's done. You can't do that to voters and expect to win an election. And I bet you he flames out before he even makes it to South Carolina. You can't behave like that. It's unbelievable. Guy's totally unhinged.
What do you think's going on in his campaign when they see all of this happening around, the numbers and the non-support?
People got to be depressed. They're probably crying every morning. Oh, my God, why did I pick Biden? Why didn't I pick Buttigieg? It seemed like Biden was going to do so well. Well, he's not doing well. But speaking of somebody who is doing well, and that's President Trump. Last week was a great week for him. He gave a great speech at the State of the Union. We got a couple of clips that I want to play for you if we can get through them, and we got a lot to get through, but I want to try to do it. Okay, he was also acquitted on the impeachment charges the next day. Then shortly after that, he got rid of EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland. Remember him? He testified against President Trump in the impeachment proceedings in the House. He also got rid of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and his twin brother, got them out of the National Security Council where they shouldn't have been. Remember, Vindman admitted on the stand that he violated the chain of command. And last but not least, the Democrats, led by Da Nang Dick Blumenthal, remember they had that emoluments lawsuit? You remember, I heard so many people talking about emoluments. But just wait till emoluments comes up, and then Trump's really done for. Well, guess what? That lawsuit was dismissed on Friday of last week. Those Democrats don't have standing. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit rule. But I want to play for you now a clip from the State of the Union address. And this is a longer clip, and I've cut it down. I've cut out almost all the applause out of this clip. But I wanted to play this for you because listen to this litany of achievements that President Trump lays out. And not at any time during this entire thing does a single Democrat clap, well, except for maybe Kyrsten Sinema stands up toward the end when they start talking about disabled unemployment being down. But all throughout, the Democrats, who are all dressed in white, we'll call them the Resistance Caucus, they all sat on their hands and scowled at the president. They couldn't clap. And, of course, you remember this is all the coup de grace at the end is Nancy Pelosi ripping up his speech behind him. I mean, so childish and petty. But let's listen to President Trump's litany of achievements. And remember, as you're listening to this, the Democrats didn't clap for any of this. These are some of their core constituencies, and they don't support any of these achievements.
3 years ago, we launched the Great American Comeback. Tonight, I stand before you to share the incredible results. Jobs are booming, incomes are soaring, poverty is plummeting, crime is falling, confidence is surging, and our country is thriving and highly respected again. America's enemies are on the run, America's fortunes are on the rise, and America's future is blazing bright. The years of economic decay are over. The days of our country being used, taken advantage of, and even scorned by other nations are long behind us. Gone too are the broken promises, jobless recoveries, tired platitudes, and constant excuses for the depletion of American wealth, power, and prestige. In just 3 short years, we have shattered the mentality of American decline, and we have rejected the downsizing of Americans' destiny. We have totally rejected the downsizing. We're moving forward at a pace that was unimaginable just a short time ago, and we are never, ever going back. I am thrilled to report to you tonight that our economy is the best it has ever been. Our military is completely rebuilt, with its power being unmatched anywhere in the world, and it's not even close. Our borders are secure. Our families are flourishing. Our values are renewed. Our pride is restored. And for all of these reasons, I say to the people of our great country and to the members of Congress, the state of our union is stronger than ever before. The vision I will lay out this evening demonstrates how we are building the world's most prosperous and inclusive society, one where every citizen can join in America's unparalleled success and where every community can take part in America's extraordinary rise. From the instant I took office, I moved rapidly to revive the U.S. economy, slashing a record number of job-killing regulations, enacting historic and record-setting tax cuts, and fighting for fair and reciprocal trade agreements. Our agenda is relentlessly pro-worker, pro-family, pro-growth, and most of all, pro-American. We are advancing with unbridled optimism and lifting our citizens of every race, color, religion, and creed very high. Since my election, we have created 7 million new jobs, 5 million more than government experts projected during the previous administration. The unemployment rate is the lowest in over half a century. And very incredibly, the average unemployment rate under my administration is lower than any administration in the history of our country. If we hadn't reversed the failed economic policies of the previous administration, the world would not now be witnessing this great economic success. The unemployment rate for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans has reached the lowest levels in history.
Listen to that.
African American youth unemployment has reached an all-time low. African American poverty has declined to the lowest rate ever recorded. The unemployment rate for women reached the lowest level in almost 70 years, and last year women filled 72% of all new jobs added.
Democrats aren't clapping for any of this.
The unemployment rate dropped to a record low. The unemployment rate for disabled Americans has reached an all-time low. Workers without a high school diploma have achieved the lowest unemployment rate recorded in U.S. history. A record number of young Americans are now employed. Under the last administration, more than 10 million people were added to the food stamp rolls. Under my administration, 7 million Americans have come off food stamps and 10 million people have been lifted off of welfare.
Democrats aren't clapping for any of this.
In 8 years under the last administration, over 300,000 working-age people dropped out of the workforce. In just 3 years of my administration, 3.5 million people, working-age people, have joined the workforce. Since my election, the net worth of the bottom half of wage earners has increased by 47%, 3 times faster than the increase for the top 1%. After decades of flat and falling incomes, wages are rising fast, and wonderfully, they are rising fastest for low-income workers who have seen a 16% pay increase since my election. This is a blue-collar boom. Real median household income is now at the highest level ever recorded. Since my election, U.S. stock markets have soared 70%, adding more than $12 trillion to our nation's wealth, transcending anything anyone believed was possible. This is a record. It is something that every country in the world is looking up to. They admire. Consumer confidence has just reached amazing new highs. All of those millions of people with 401ks and pensions are doing far better than they have ever done before, with increases of 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100%, and even more. Jobs and investments are pouring into 9,000 previously neglected neighborhoods, thanks to Opportunity Zones, a plan spearheaded by Senator Tim Scott as part of our great Republican tax cuts.
Democrats are not clapping for this.
People and companies are pouring money into poor neighborhoods or areas that haven't seen investment in many decades, creating jobs, energy, and excitement. This is the first time that these deserving communities have seen anything like this. It's all working. Opportunity Zones are helping Americans like Army veteran Tony Rankins from Cincinnati, Ohio. After struggling with drug addiction, Tony lost his job, his house, and his family. He was homeless. But then Tony found a construction company that invests in Opportunity Zones. He is now a top tradesman, drug-free, reunited with his family, and he is here tonight. Tony, keep up the great work. Our roaring economy has, for the first time ever, given many former prisoners the ability to get a great job and a fresh start. This second chance at life is made possible because we passed landmark criminal justice reform into law. Everybody said that criminal justice reform couldn't be done, but I got it done. And
listen to that. He got it done. Now that's what finally broke the Democrats. Right there. Criminal justice reform is what finally broke the Democrats, and some of them stood up and clapped for the president. All those achievements. all that benefit to minority communities. And it isn't until criminal justice reform hits that they said, you know what, we can't keep sitting on our hands, or we're going to alienate every single category of our historical voters. We got to stand up for that. He broke them.
They'll be on our show, as I told our audience, for the next 2 Sundays. Next Sunday from Deauville Hotel in the Miami Beach show starring Hollywood's exciting Missy Gaynor. But ladies and gentlemen, once
Well, she was just 17, you know what I mean. And the way she looked was way beyond compare.
Well, it was 76 years ago, yesterday, that happened. February 9th, 1964, about 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time on the Ed Sullivan Show, the British invasion.
I remember that.
The Beatles. Were you watching?
I used to watch that every Sunday night religiously. I never missed the Ed Sullivan Show.
73 million people, it's estimated, were watching at that time. That's amazing. That's a lot of people. Particularly, it was a country was much smaller back then. So that was the beginning of what they call the British invasion and
of course, there were only 3 channels.
You didn't have a lot of choices. The phenomenon of the Beatles. Well, we just I had another clip to play for you from the State of the Union, but we really don't have time to do that. We want to get into our out there. But just remember, last week was a great week for the president between the State of the Union speech, the acquittal on the trumped-up impeachment charges, no pun intended, the firing of Ambassador Gordon Sondland, the removal of the Vindman twin brothers from the National Security Council, those insubordinate twin brothers, and the defeat of the Democrats' emoluments lawsuit against the president. Those are just some of his achievements last week. Now, certainly we expect that the Democrats will come back with even more impeachment efforts in the future, but let's rest on our laurels just a little bit. It was a great week for the president and for this country. Now, let's talk about a country that's not having a very great week, and that is China with the coronavirus. Over the weekend, the reported death toll of the coronavirus hit 910 people. So it's already killed more people than the SARS outbreak back in 2003. There were 813 killed, and the SARS outbreak was a year-long outbreak. Now, remember, SARS is severe acute respiratory syndrome, and it is also a coronavirus, just like this new novel coronavirus 2019 that's come out of China. The global confirmed cases have hit well over 40,000, and most of those are in China. And outside of China, there are reported to be about 385 cases. Now, the World Health Organization Director General says that, quote, we may only be seeing the tip of the iceberg. And speaking of icebergs, a lot of these outbreaks are occurring, not a lot of them, but some of them are occurring on cruise ships. In fact, there was a cruise ship that is quarantined in Yokohama, Japan, and there are now 136 or more reported cases on board. I mean, we're going by the latest news that Morgan was able to look at before the show, so it may even be more than that now. Well, let me just give you an idea. As of Saturday, there were 61 reported cases. Now there are 136 on this cruise ship. This is the Diamond Princess cruise ship that's now quarantined off of Yokohama, Japan. And, of course, if you've ever been on a cruise ship, as we know, Pat George and I have been on a few, but Pat George has been on a few more than me. Remember how norovirus used to spread through the cruise ships? I remember back when I first went on a cruise, I was worried about that. I was thinking, I'm not going to go on a cruise. I'm going to get sick, norovirus, and it spreads through the entire cruise ship. Well, what do you think coronavirus is going to do? Those poor people sitting off the coast of Japan are just, they're sitting in a quarantined area with a bunch of sick people, and imagine what's happening. I mean, all that sick air, if it's airborne, is flowing through the ship's air control systems and the food and everything else. I mean, it's really, that's one place I would not want to be, is stuck on a cruise ship.
I'm supposed to go in April. I don't think I'm doing it.
Well, hopefully you bought travel insurance, right, on that one. There's also a cruise ship, a Royal Caribbean, the Anthem of the Seas, has been quarantined off New Jersey.
That's a big new one, too.
That's a big new one, and there are supposedly at least 12 people on that one who may be sick. But now let's flip back, talking about the official numbers. Over 910 people killed officially, and well over 40,000 cases worldwide officially. But what came out over the weekend? Well, a number of things. First of all, I don't know if you saw it last week, but Zero Hedge, that news site that can't be named, that we love, reported there's actually a news site in China that for a little bit of time let some numbers go up, and that's Tencent News in China. And this was also reported by the Taiwan Times, that Tencent apparently inadvertently released what may be the actual numbers of infections and deaths in China. And those, by the way, were astronomically higher than the official figures. This happened on February 1st. According to Tencent News, there were 24,589 deaths in China so far. So almost 25,000 deaths and over 150,000 confirmed cases. So way more than what's being admitted to. Now, over the weekend, an exiled Chinese billionaire reported that he believes, based on information that he's getting out of Wuhan, that the death toll is actually closer to 50,000 people already killed in China from coronavirus, and maybe 1.5 million have been infected to date. Now, other things that we can look at to say, well, what in the world's going on in Wuhan? Is that true? Could there be 50,000 dead people? Well, first of all, if you don't know this, the town of Chengdu, which is 14.4 million people, is now also under lockdown. It's under this house arrest quarantine that's been spreading across the entire country of China. And we understand parts of Beijing are even under quarantine already. There are over 400 million people under quarantine in China. Think about that. 400 million people. It's almost half the country. It's at least a third of the country. Almost half are under quarantine. I mean, that's way up from the last time we talked about it when there were something like 60 million people under quarantine. So you say this isn't spreading and China's reporting marginal increases in people that have this virus and marginal increases in the death toll? That just doesn't match up with what else we're seeing. Another interesting thing I saw over the weekend, and this is pretty disturbing. The people who are getting videos out and who are reporting out of Wuhan, and by the way, these people are often disappearing after they start this kind of reporting. They're reporting, and online weather data shows there's a massive release of sulfur dioxide gas around Wuhan. Well, what does that come from? It comes from the burning of organic matter. They're reporting that the crematoriums around Wuhan have been burning 24/7, burning all these bodies. In fact, you can find videos that show that there's a strange fog that settled down over Wuhan, China. And again, this is displayed on weather sites reporting this kind of information, that there's a massive cloud of sulfur dioxide gas just sitting over Wuhan from all of the burned bodies. Now, meanwhile, if you listen to the Chinese ambassador on The Nation over the weekend, he says this is all about racial discrimination and xenophobia, and these are nothing but crazy conspiracy theories. Well, China may be able to control the news, but it obviously can't control this coronavirus. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.